Namaskar. In this episode of Dil Se, we're going to talk about what happened in Bangladesh in the context of the fact that whenever a ruler, a prime minister, a president, whoever, loses touch with the people, then in this part of the world we've seen it's either exile or getting out of power. And the kind of violence that we have seen in the last few days in Bangladesh and earlier in other countries. And in fact, after the Second World War, we haven't had a more violent world than it is today. Whether it's Hamas, the conflict with Israel, or in other parts of the world, Iran getting into the fray. So there is something that has happened wherever economic development has taken place, somehow we get the feeling, at least I get the feeling, that the benefits of economic development have helped the higher echelons of society, not percolated down. And after COVID, with unemployment rising in every country, the situation has become worse. And if the ruler loses touch with the people, then what happened in Bangladesh can happen anywhere in the world. So we have three extraordinary people with us today who are going to talk about this. And as you know, this is always a freewheeling discussion. We have an old friend of mine, Shiv Shankar Menon, who at present is a fellow of the Center for Social and Economic Progress. And he's a visiting professor at Ashoka. He holds a chair on China at Ashoka. And what a lineage he has. His great-grandfather was the president of the International Congress way back in 1897, the only Keralite to be president of the International Congress. And his grandfather was a foreign secretary. His uncle also was the 15th foreign secretary. His father resides as an ambassador to Yugoslavia. And what can I say? He's been to all the hot spots of the world: China, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. He was our foreign secretary 2006 to 9. He was our NSA 2010 to 2014. He was ambassador to Pakistan, China, Sri Lanka. You were, what should I say? You were a star in getting the nuclear deal through. So you hold a fellowship. You've written 2 books. At the MIT, you hold a fellowship. At Harvard, you hold a fellowship. So what better person to come to the show? But thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
TCA Raghavan, I didn't know. It's, he is a history buff, apart from the fact that he's been ambassador to Pakistan. And he knows a lot about the region. And he's written several books. Now he's gone back to history and writing some more books. I didn't know that he wrote a book on the poets, Behram Khan. That's very interesting. So we have a person who has written books, The People Next Door, on Pakistan. And you've also written a history of history men, Jadunath Sarkar and others. You've served in the UK, you've served in Bhutan, you've served in Kuwait, Afghanistan, Iran division you looked after. So you know this region very well. And of course, Suhasini, what can I say about you? I mean, I never knew that you had been, first of all, you, of course, at the moment, the diplomatic editor of The Hindu. And you was at Boston. You did your journalism at Boston. And you were at the CNN United Nations Bureau in New York in 1994, and in the bureau here in 1995. And you worked in CNN International from 1995 to 2005. And in the last 3 decades, you've been a reporting career. You had a reporting career, covered so many conflicts: Libya, Lanka, Lebanon, Syria, and you also got hurt at some stage.
Interesting times.
Interesting times. So we have a journalist perspective, and we have a foreign policy perspective, and we have, unfortunately, a lawyer's perspective. So let's start a discussion with you, Shivshankar. What do you think about the outcome of what's going to happen, or what's happened in Bangladesh?
In Bangladesh?
Yes.
I think, as you said, this, I think, is what happens when a regime loses touch with its own people, but also when partly it's the results of accelerated growth, and uneven growth, inequality, and most important, the sense that somehow opportunities are slipping them, are going, and it's young people, you'll notice, it's students who were out in the streets who made this. Various political parties, etc., then utilized it for their own ends, but primarily this was a people's movement. It was a revolution on the streets, and I think we should recognize it as such, rather than looking for foreign hands or for looking for purely political explanations. And this will take time to sort itself out. I mean, it's a churn. In Bangladesh, Bangladesh has changed tremendously, and you have whole new generations who don't remember the past, who are not carrying baggage, but they have their own issues to deal with. So they have to sort it out among themselves.
But isn't it surprising that Sheikh Hasina actually brought a lot of economic development?
In fact,
in terms of her per capita income, it was higher than in India.
Yes, it
right?
is.
Higher than in India.
On social development
indicators,
they do better than us.
Did better.
Yeah.
So despite all that,
in terms of women's empowerment and bringing them into the labor force, in fact, our numbers are going down.
Right.
Theirs are
so
going
despite
up.
all that, you had this churning happening.
But I think you'll notice that shakes society up. And what you're seeing now is a renegotiation of the political contract and the social contract in a society which is under change and which is primarily young now. This is a whole new society. And in that sense, it's something we should understand, because we are also a very young society. We've changed very fast. And if you look at inequality, it's grown. And it's something that I think it's not just a Bangladeshi problem or an Indian problem. If you look at South Asia as a whole, in the last 8 years, you've had 8 government changes, not all of them willing or happy.
Sri Lanka.
Or constitutional. Sri Lanka. Nepal has had more than one.
Yes.
Pakistan.
Maldives,
Afghanistan, you name it.
Yes.
I mean, there isn't a country in South Asia.
So we are surrounded by hotspots.
Look at Myanmar. So it's not surrounded as South Asia is what Adam Tooze calls a polycrisis. It's economic, it's social, it's political, all at the same time. So it's not going to be an easy time, I think. And in fact, from our point of view, it actually, because South Asia, the borders are porous, you have cross-border ethnicities. These are brand new lines drawn on maps, which don't reflect reality on the ground, divide communities, Mizos, Chin, wherever you look.
Yes.
So I think you have to look at it as one consolidated issue.
It's a regional issue. You think it's a problem that affects all of us.
Yeah, and it's something that you need to deal with together. You can't say, I as India am going to deal with this and sit apart from this, and you have to deal with it with your neighbors.
You know, after COVID, as far as the economy of Bangladesh was concerned, the unemployment rate was the highest, 20%. Of the 170 million people in Bangladesh, 30 million were unemployed. Suddenly the GDP went down, the per capita went down, and this is brought about. And then, of course, with the reservation issue. So what is your perspective on this?
Well, I think the contingent factors certainly played a role. The COVID and the impact it had, and it's not just Bangladesh. In fact, if you look across the region, it's had a very wide impact in Pakistan, in Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and now Bangladesh. But I think there is a more fundamental churn underway, and it's useful to remember that revolutions take place not when things are declining, but in fact they follow a period of things looking up. And the classic case of the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution followed a period of relative prosperity, because revolutions happen when people have aspirations. And I think in Bangladesh, as Mr. Menon said, the government lost touch. I think it lost the plot. And when that happens, then you have a revolutionary kind of situation. Now, how much of the old institutions will survive as they move forward? I think that is the critical question, because if all existing contracts are being renegotiated, then what happens to the system which had existed? My impression is that they will retain enough of the system, but it will be a process which will be very painful and will not be settled quickly. But certainly these problems are there. And I would say for India, we have to be less narcissistic in looking at what is happening in our neighborhood and try to see things with a little more empathy, and that there's no conspiracy, but it is actually agency which is
We
being...
start rebuilding our bridges with Bangladesh.
I think it's certainly with Bangladesh, but as was mentioned, we need to have a region-wide approach, and right now we don't have a region-wide approach at all, because SAARC has been stuck because of India-Pakistan differences, and BIMSTEC, which was the new hope, is now stuck because of what is happening in Myanmar. So you don't have a region-wide toolkit. Now, I would say that rather than reinvent the wheel, it's better to go back to the things which we have done in the past and try to redo them better.
I do feel that there is a thread across South Asia that we have to look at closely. Because since 2021, as you've said, in 2021, Afghanistan, and then Myanmar, and then Pakistan, and Nepal, and Maldives, we've seen all of our neighbors seeing similar kinds of street protests or other kinds of, a leader being disconnected from the people. And there are common threads. One, as you pointed out, is the unemployment factor. COVID has hit any country that needs export revenue or tourism the most. Yes. And so every country, including Bhutan, is really badly impacted by COVID, and we may not see those problems right at the surface, but they're there. But the other side of that, I feel, and I've traveled to every country in the region, is that it's not enough to give people economic progress. It is not enough to give people the freedom to do everything, but withhold the freedom to dissent. And while Sheikh Hasina came to Bangladesh in her second tenure in 2007, 2008, and really showed the country a golden period. Yes. In every respect, you would go to Dhaka and it was bustling, it was growing, the youth were so excited. But post 2014 January, which was a boycott, election, what we saw is a kind of conviction within the government that A, it could be a single party system, B, that everyone else was some kind of a traitor to the cause. And you sort of begin to shut out a lot of forces.
She started calling them Razakars.
Well, that's the students, and they took it very badly. Yeah. I mean, now you see her son is actually backtracking. He says his mother never said that. But the point being that if you decide that you are going to be a single party in this region, we are an argumentative race, you cut out everyone. And while I don't know whether there was a foreign hand involved in spurring along the protests, was it the Jamaat and the Chhatra Shibir that was
I think
helped,
Pakistan must have had some hand, definitely.
Or was it the US who has now seen Professor Yunus come to the fore? You saw the US taking unprecedented measures, passing a visa policy against Bangladesh for the elections in January. She certainly got a lot of enemies working against her at the time, simply by saying it's only me who will be in power. And that's one thing I think across the region people have to learn. And I think the third one is a dangerous one. We are a tinderbox because every country in South Asia has one visible majority, and a very large majority. You look at India, you look at Pakistan, you look at Maldives, you look at Myanmar, you look at Bangladesh. Every one of those countries has a very strong majority. If you play with the communal feelings, communal passions in any of these countries, we are all so interlinked. It has a very dangerous effect of spilling over. So when, for example, our government speaks about its concerns about the minority, I would urge them to do it more discreetly because they have repercussions across borders.
Oh, I think Yunus has made a very good statement on that.
That's right.
That I don't want the minorities to be attacked, there should be peace. But the point that you made, I think it's very, very important, that you may have economic development, you have prosperity, but if you clamp down on people, and we've seen that time and again,
yes.
You clamp down on people, you pass a digital act like she did, right? You control the media, like it's happening in my country too, right? NGOs. You start trials of those people in 1971, right? And then you prosecute them. You send a man like Yunus to jail for some petty little thing.
200 cases.
To some workers not being paid, labor not being paid. For 6 months, 170 people actually around the world leaders passed a resolution that this should not be done. So I think there is a connectivity that even if you get economic development, if you do not allow people the democratic rights that they are entitled to, their voice in a global world today, you're going to have this result. What do you say?
But for me, Bangladesh is not Pakistan. Many people in India make this mistake of sort of equating them, because it used to be East Pakistan, but that's why 71 happened, because it's not. And it was distinguished by three things, politically speaking. One is Bengali identity, which was a defense against extremism, against various kinds of. The other is a very vibrant civil society and mass-based political parties. And the third was democratic institutions. Now, the trouble is that two latter things over the last 10 years or so have slowly been whittled away. People have lost faith in them. And this is true of, I don't think any politicians have much credibility in Bangladesh or across the subcontinent.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that the arc should be spread a bit wider.
So you're left now with Bengali identity. So no amount of economic progress, I think, can compensate for this. Man is also a political animal.
Of course.
Apart from being an economic animal and a social animal, whether you like it or not. And so so for me, this is therefore where the churn happens, and where I'm not so confident that they can go back to the old institutions, that the old institutions will survive, because they've taken quite a beating in the last 10 years or so. But that doesn't mean that I'm pessimistic about where they'll go in the long run. Because ultimately, these people's revolutions will ultimately come back to, and Bengali identity is very strong.
But this is going to be
everybody will jump in and use it, whether it's our adversaries, our friends, whoever. They see chaos, they see churn, they will jump in. They have interest. The US has interest. They want to keep the Chinese out. They have been looking for a base, for a naval base. Everybody has. Pakistan sees an opportunity. Our enemies see a good way of, we've seen it in the past. Indian insurgent groups, etc., etc. So, yeah, you must expect that. That's the nature of the world.
But there are two issues then. Number one, this Bengali identity. This will result in our political class saying, look, they are being persecuted, so we need to bring them here. We need to protect them. That creates its own problems because in states like Tripura and Assam, they don't want the Bengali Hindu to come, right? Mamata would not mind it.
They don't want the Bengali.
Period. They don't want them to come. And they say, they made a statement, the borders are sealed, we won't, no matter which religion you belong to, we'll not let him in.
The Citizenship Amendment Act has not been put into place for the Northeast states because of this reason, because of the pushback.
But the problem is that even it's not, but 2014
is the cutoff.
Cutoff.
So they don't qualify.
So they don't even qualify for that. This creates a lot of problems for us. That's one part. The other part is that with Jamaat being friendly with the BNP, right? Now the Jamaat is going to use this, right, in a way that is done in the past as well, to infiltrate and create trouble for us in the Northeast. So how serious is that?
Well, I think it's quite serious, but for a start, we have to look at Bangladesh on its own terms and not through the prism of Pakistan and China. I think if we excessively, weigh our analysis with too much of geopolitics, that analysis will be faulty, because you will lose the specificities of what is happening in Bangladesh today. It's a young country. Much of the old bromides we trot out, that the Jamaat never wanted separation from Pakistan, it doesn't matter anymore, because the debate has changed. In Pakistan too, the Jamaat-e-Islami never wanted the breakup of India in 1947. They used to call Jinnah Kafre-Azam. But that's all in the past. I think what is giving the Jamaat prominence today are factors which are very contemporary and which have to do with governance. And certainly there is a large element of how Islamists see their role in modern societies, and that is something which they have to come to terms with themselves. But I would say that if we view everything through the prism of the past or through the Pakistan-China prism, we will not be able to establish a good base to deal with what is going to happen in Bangladesh. Now, I think we should have an open mind and deal with all the parties. I think it would be, I think to, club the entire BNP as being some kind of Islamist from the past.
No, they're not Islamic.
It's not.
No,
it's not. It has different strands, and we should be open to dealing with all the strands.
And Khalida has made a nice statement.
But luckily, what we have done in the last 15 years, most of it is not regime specific.
Yes.
Quite apart from the image and that of us being identified with Sheikh Hasina. If you look at building power lines,
Yes.
The inland water transport, whether it's opening the markets to Bangladesh
Bus routes,
exports,
rail routes.
rail routes
Yes.
to Agat. These are not regime specific. These are institutionalization of cooperation, of opening up. And those kinds of things, I think, is what we need to now keep your head down, but concentrate on keeping that going and building on that.
Yeah, the zero tariff lines, the
Exactly.
loans at very low
Yes.
rates, all of those. I wouldn't completely agree that we haven't been partisan.
No, I'm not saying that. I didn't say that.
But these things are not
I
partisan.
said these, much of what we've
Much
done
of what we have
was-
done is not partisan.
I think we
shouldn't be partisan.
It's not limited to
And
chicken's
shouldn't
neck,
be
as far as their access is concerned. All that.
Because we have failed to reach out to all parts of Bangladeshi polity, and we have made it kind of contingent on Hasina or Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League's approval who we dealt with. And I'll give you an example. There was a BNP lawyer who wanted to come to Delhi famously and wanted to meet with think tanks in Delhi. He had meetings set up. Some of the newspapers wrote about it. The next thing you knew, he landed here from London. He was handed his boarding card for the return. And he was sent back, deported on arrival. Those kind of measures kind of gave the idea that the Indian government was not partisan. And Sheikh Hasina suffered from that same image in her country. The Citizenship Amendment Act, for example, is essentially critical of Bangladesh, right? The CAA says that Bangladesh is not able to take care of its minorities, and therefore we must take them. And despite the fact that it was critical of her, Sheikh Hasina maintained that it was an internal matter of India's, that she was not going to openly criticize it. When Prime Minister Modi went to Dhaka, I think people forget this, there were riots on the street.
Yes.
There were protests in which I think a dozen
got
people
killed,
were
I believe
killed.
some
A
people
dozen
were
people were
killed.
killed in
19
police
people,
firing.
Yes.
There was,
Yes.
And there were, so Sheikh Hasina also showed her kind of ability to really stick with the Delhi government. The Delhi government did, but it wasn't necessarily to their benefits in the large scheme of things, because you end up looking like you are dealing only with leaders and parties and not with countries and people.
So in the context of what you said, I think today also the role of the army, right? Army seems to have taken a back seat with having set up an interim government. They seem to have taken, I don't know how far that will be, that's true, but they seem to have. The perception is that. And let's see now how the elections take place.
Well, once before, they, between 2006, after the
I
military
think
took
you
over,
were called from Colombo, no?
well, various things happened. But by 2008, they cleaned up the electoral rolls by issuing photo ID cards to voters, took 20 million people off a roll which included 80 million total, fake voters, and then held a fair election. Yeah. So I think the Bangladesh army is, again, different from the Pakistan army. We shouldn't assume that they will behave the way the Pakistan army has.
And just specifically in this week, the role the army played, I've heard from protesters and from student groups themselves saying on Monday that something strange happened, that the army went out there but refused to open fire with bullets and pellets. Now, the complaint against the police and the paramilitary for the last few weeks is that they have shot at students, and a lot of the injuries were waist upwards, which means that you're aiming to hit somebody above the waist. And pellet injuries, eyes, they had 200 or more cases of people losing their eyesight. And when the army decided to go there to hold the peace, to hold the line but not fire, something changed very dramatically in the way the crowd was behaving on Monday morning. The role played by the army chief when he went to see Prime Minister Hasina, and apparently he went 3 or 4 times, and he's related to her actually through marriage. The role played where he said, we can no longer hold this situation, and you don't even have the time to give that speech at the end. seems to have been that the army decided to take a role. And then, as you said, in the last couple of days after the interim government has been put in place and sworn in, they have taken a back seat. But obviously, if the violence returns, and they have a very tense situation right now because the police went on strike. They said, we are going to be accused, but we were just following orders. The police are now, I'm told, going in plain clothes. When they're forced to come and hold the peace, they're going in plain clothes because they're too scared to go home in uniforms because they are being targeted. So all of these little schisms in society that have built up in the last few weeks will have to be calmed. It's not an easy road.
Yeah, the Waqaruzzaman is the army chief.
General.
I believe he went to Sheikh Hasina and said, we're not going to fire anymore. Because she apparently told them, continue.
Yeah, continue.
Right? So we're not going to fire anymore, which is what resulted in actually then flying out.
And of course, once the mobs and the protests started to come closer to Gana Bhavan,
That's right.
I think that was the signal.
That's right. Now, what happens to her? I mean, she's here now. She's at Hindon Air Base, I believe, right?
Well, I don't know where she is.
That's what I was told. And she can't get a visa anywhere at the moment, because if she had to flown straight to the UK, she could have asked for asylum. But since she's now located here, she can't get asylum in the UK straight away. So there's a big problem. So what do we do? That's the other issue. And the Foreign Secretary has made a statement, well, this situation is evolving and we'll see what to do.
Traditionally, we've given refuge to whoever comes. And we've said that this is not political, this is just humanitarian, and dealt with it as such. And frankly, I don't think you have much choice but to do that again.
Well, if you do that,
And
it has implications.
She's been in exile in India before.
Yeah, but that's earlier. You're talking about
Whatever.
1975,
Yeah.
when all her family were killed
Yeah.
and she and Rihanna
And
were
so
the
on,
only
yeah.
survivors. That's a different issue. Today, I mean, this is my personal opinion, it has an impact on politics in Bangladesh as well.
Sure.
I'm sure it does.
Yes.
But, I think we have to make it quite clear
Yeah,
that
that's right.
I don't think we have a
and
choice
you-
once she's here.
Yeah,
once she's
I agree
here,
with you.
you don't have a choice.
But I think the government does need to answer two questions, and that's our government. One, were we so unprepared that we had planned her flight to Delhi but not already negotiated for her or had her negotiate on her behalf to whoever she was going to go to next? That the UK, what we understand is the asylum request went in as soon as she landed. And within a few hours, they kind of said, we'll have to put a pin in it, we're not ready. And then we got a statement from the British government, which was very odd, which said you can't apply for an asylum once you've gone to another country, which are rules that are used normally. But this is, Prime Minister of a country. And let's remember, the UK has taken in the BNP leader, Tariq Rahman. They've taken in so many Pakistani prime ministers who have fled. So it seems as if there was a miscommunication over there. So that's one place where the government may wish to answer. The second question is really that having her here now, are we going to treat her as a fugitive? Is she going to remain at a Hindon Air Base, undisclosed location? Her daughter has tweeted, although I saw that the daughter deleted the tweet a day later to say, I can't see my mother and I can't hug her. So it's a question of how we are going to ensure that she gets the respect she wants.
Did we have no idea as to what was going to happen in Bangladesh? We had no idea?
I think we were caught by surprise when the end game unfolded, like everyone else was. I don't think even Sheikh Hasina or the army chief knew it's going to play out in this way. I think it just...
Not even Yunus, I think.
Probably, certainly not Yunus at all. Nobody anticipated this... But I do think
when you have people being killed, Khalida being in prison, sentenced to 18 years, something is bound to break,
Well, people have been saying that you can't...
this is unsustainable.
It's not
all
sustainable.
That,
yes.
But nobody knows exactly when and how.
That's true, but at least we could have advised.
I'm sure that, in any sensible government would have made plans. Must have thought these things through, would have contingency plans. But how it happens and the actual timing of when do you talk to people, this, that, and the other, that you can't predict.
Yeah, but
you have to be prepared mentally. And you must be prepared for all kinds of things to happen because history is not a straight line. Nothing ever happens in,
But we've been having this India out campaign. In Bangladesh, right?
It was a kind of
it was
replica
clear
of
that
the
this
Maldives.
couldn't be-
I don't think we anticipated that she would come to India.
No?
That she would
can't
stay
believe
here.
Stay here.
That she would
I
stay
think the
here.
anticipation she'd
She
go
would,
through.
we thought she'd come and then move somewhere else. But I do think at a time like this, we also have to take stands on principle that you shouldn't let down your friends.
Absolutely.
No, that's fine.
And
You can't be seen to be
you
letting
can't be
No,
seen to be
and
doing
she has been very good to our government.
Exactly.
No doubt about
and
that.
She's held
certainly-
India's interests.
Certainly in Afghanistan, where when there was a similar change, no one anticipated that it will change so very quickly. There we have left people with the taste in their mouth that India doesn't stand with its friends,
Right.
and that's a mistake.
Unlike the past, we tried. Najibullah, you remember, we've
In the past, we've handled very difficult
and
situations
we've
like
had
this.
very difficult, and from all over. I mean, the Nepali Congress, all those leaders were here for
And
years.
there are SOPs that
you can-
We know how
that
to.
the person is given full respect, but at the same time cannot really.
Apoliticize it.
I
That's
think
right.
the one question which nobody can answer right now is if the government in Bangladesh takes a nasty turn in terms of reprisal, revenge, and decides, not the interim government, but there will be an election in the new government, and decides to put cases against
Yes.
Sheikh Hasina, as many have threatened,
And ask for
and
extradition.
ask for an extradition. What will India do then? So there is a desire that she should be here, and the External Affairs Minister was very clear in Parliament. In Parliament, he said that she wanted to come here for the moment. He didn't say anything longer
that's
than
right,
that.
I saw.
So there's the hope that it'll ease the situation to go somewhere else. She has family everywhere. Her niece is an MP in the UK. Her nephew lives in Finland. Her son lives in the US. Her daughter's in Delhi. There's also, we were told, some conversations with UAE, Saudi Arabia, places she could go to. And we shouldn't rule out that she can go back to Bangladesh if things calm
We have an
down.
extradition
her
treaty
son-
with
Well, no,
Bangladesh.
I
But
meant-
her son has said today that if
that
there's
they
an
want to go back.
election,
she will want to go.
That may be bravado.
But we shouldn't rule it
But
out. Look at
I-
Pakistan. How many times have leaders from
Nawaz
exile
Sharif
come
come and
back?
gone.
Gotabaya Rajapakse ran away. His homes were attacked and all the rest, and now he lives there as an ordinary citizen. So nothing is forever. Nothing is at the end. And I think
Politics.
India has to see its role with that prism in mind.
But one thing that disturbs me is that in 2014, the opposition BNP boycotted the election. In 2024, they boycotted the election. This should have sent signals to our country as to what's happening there. And I think some kind of dialogue should have taken place, because it's like a tinderbox situation. Anything can happen at any time. And I think somewhere, in the context of our own foreign policy, our relations with our neighbors seem to have gone down.
Well, it's been, if you look at the
It's-
last 5,
it's-
6 years, actually, the situation
See what
has
happened
deteriorated.
between 2004 to 2014, and see the situation 2014 to now, and
got
it's
much
radically changed. It's
I
out of
think
control.
TCA put his finger on that moment. For 10 years now, we have had no pan-regional organization coming together. For 10 years, since 2014,
No SARC meeting.
September, no SARC meeting. It's stuck because it's to be held in Pakistan, and we will not go to Pakistan for whatever reason. The fact is there is no South Asian mechanism in place that is actually really working. And so we have lost our touch with so many parts of the region. Even if BIMSTEC, and there's supposed to be a big BIMSTEC summit coming up in the next few weeks, if BIMSTEC had a problem with Myanmar, what happens now with Bangladesh? You can keep slicing the region and say, I will only speak to those whom I like. But people will not necessarily, always
Like you.
throw up leaders that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
like.
We gave too much importance to bilateralism. Bilateralism is the key in South
No,
Asia.
but the other thing is you've invested less and less. If you look at what you're actually doing with them, that is actually, look at the MEA budget figures over the last 10 years. Apart from Bhutan, you're actually spending much less in the neighborhood.
Yeah, but that's
You've
because
got
we're now
your-
giving loans, because we say we do it
Yeah,
according to
but
the...
China has given a credit line of $24 billion.
Well, comparisons with China are never going
No,
to
but
work.
this is the problem now. China is actually weighing in, right? And with our border dispute with China, and there's no possibility of getting any kind of resolution there, we're being hemmed in. And yet our Atmanirbhar Bharat is just not moving ahead.
But if you were to do polls, I think in the region, India would still be more popular amongst people than China, because people have now over time seen the perils of China's.
Your strengths actually are outside what government does. It's your society, it's the openness of your people, it's the fact that you have, as I said, cross-border communities which operate across all your borders. These are what actually, and you have huge advantages which you need to use.
But have you used them?
No, that's the whole point. That's what I'm saying. You haven't invested. I mean, you're doing G20s and you're worried about the global stage. And you need to deal with your own immediate neighborhood first.
We've created a narrative vacuum.
Yeah.
Because of the way we handled SARC, and SARC has a certain resonance. You heard Mr. Yunus say in one of his early statements that I'm thinking about SARC and I'm from SARC.
And countries of SARC must come together and reach out to Hasina.
I think regionalism has a calming influence. It may not have tangible takeaways, and I think we expect too much from SARC in terms of tangible takeaways, but we don't give enough emphasis.
At least you have a dialogue.
You have a dialogue, and you have
more than that, you actually have things like the South Asia University, things which have influence.
SAFTA,
these are things that visas, travel, these are the things that affect ordinary people. And that actually led to them, and all that
is
with
stakeholders. And so I think that narrative vacuum is something which you have to...
And it's dealt with derision now. You speak about SARC today and people will laugh at you. But the fact is, there is this narrative that SARC came with in the entire region that bound everyone to India. After all, most of our neighbors, I think with the exception of Afghanistan, none of our neighbors can deal with each other without India. So we had that strength, and we have willfully given that away. The other place I really feel, and I don't mean it in a superior way, I just think India has always been a country of aspiration in many ways in our neighborhood because of its democracy, because it's been a democracy, because it's been a pluralistic country, because it's been a secular country, because it's been a rule-abiding country. So even if our neighbors did not necessarily have governments that did the same thing, there was always a sense that India was something to look up to. Now, there's no question that India's own image in the last few years has taken a beating when it comes to some of those ideas of democracy, of dissent and how it's dealt with, or pluralism and secularism. And as a result, others are looking beyond India. They're looking at other places and saying, maybe I have a better deal there.
That's true. But let's sort of talk of something else beyond Bangladesh. Now, you look at what's happened in the Maldives, right? And we're now trying to build bridges. See what happened with Nepal over the years. With Pakistan, we don't allow cricketers to come here. And all of that is because of our domestic policy. In other words, we are using this, our political statements are to please the domestic constituency, which has a huge impact on our foreign policy. And therefore,
exporting our domestic
and very
policy.
negative impact. And I think that's really the heart of the problem, according to me. That as long as you keep on using
putting your domestic
politics for your purposes of getting elected, it will destabilize the neighborhood, because the neighborhood doesn't look at India like that. It's you who are using it for your own purposes. What do you think of that?
I think you're right, because here you are calling neighbors termites. This is all for domestic political gain, rather than, clearly it's not meant to win you friends. I mean, and I think this is a problem, when you treat neighborhood policy as part of your domestic political gain or advantage, party political, rather than as national interest and what can we do with it.
It's also legislative policy.
But it's also because we've stopped being consultative internally.
Yes.
If you were more consultative internally, you would have other voices telling you that this is not way. But when you look at it as party political, then you will end up with this negative consequence.
I'll give you an example of that. The Citizenship Amendment Act, we all know it's not a bad thing to open your doors to minorities who are fleeing persecution. There's never a question about that. But the Citizenship Amendment Act in its wording could have been worded differently. You can take anyone you want. You can give anyone citizenship on the spot. You don't need to write it into an act.
You didn't even need the CAA to do that.
You didn't need the CAA.
It's a pure discretionary.
But having decided to make the CAA, after all, India has taken Tibetans in thousands. They've taken Sri Lankan Tamils, Afghans in 1996. So many Burmese. so many different, but the writing, I'm told, internally there was some question, do we need to name the religions? Do we need to make it specific that we will not take a certain religion?
That caters to the domestic constituency.
Did we need to name the countries?
Yes.
Could we not have just said, you know, minorities suffering persecution in neighboring countries? So when you talk about the legislative and the idea that you're appealing to a domestic audience rather than the international, I don't think anyone would have complained if the Citizenship Amendment Act had a slightly more nuanced
If it was human rights language, there would have been no problem at all.
Yeah, we would have all welcomed it.
Yeah, we would have all
We
gone
all
beyond
know
that.
that, you know, even in the worst years or best years of India-Pakistan relations, the largest number of visas issued were to minorities in Pakistan. And everyone had a pretty fair idea that many of them are just going to come here and disappear. So there was always an unstated view that we have to be open to minorities in South Asia. Otherwise, where will they go? But it was understated and it was unstated, and perhaps that needed to be corrected in terms of the rules you have, because large number of refugees from Pakistan waiting years and years and years, being exploited by local police. There was a certain correction required. But it could have been worded differently to avoid, because, you know, in the end, as Suhasini said, you have taken a certain reputational hit.
Yes, yes. Not only that, the way you conduct your affairs within the country, qua the minorities, also has an impact, right?
Your concerns for minorities cannot end at your boundaries.
Exactly. You must understand that there are people outside who are looking at you.
Yeah, and you don't like it when they
Exactly. And you talk, when in the UK you talk about, in the US you talk about protecting in Canada you talk about protecting our minorities. And when it comes to your own country, you just do the opposite.
And you don't allow anyone else to criticize you.
That's right. That's a very serious situation. So where do you think we should go from here?
Well, I think we need to, and I hope that all these successive crises actually in relationships with the neighbors will prompt us to actually look at it fundamentally and start approaching it seriously in the way that we've been talking about. Start looking at regional cooperative solutions which actually work on both sides. Recognize their agency also.
Yes.
You know, every time you say that, oh, what happened in Bangladesh is because of the foreign hand, you are diminishing them.
Yes.
Every time you tell them that, oh, you're in a debt trap with China, you're saying you're so foolish you don't even understand, I'm telling you what you are. You need to actually change the way you do the narrative, but not more than that. You need to recognize their own agency. There will always be outside influences in the subcontinent, because for your smaller neighbors, your preponderance is so great that they will bring outside balancers to you to make you honest.
Yes.
But compete. And the only way to compete is you have to compete on terms of on every issue, whether it's politics, whether it's you need to be the source of stability. You need to be the source of prosperity in the neighborhood. And you can do it. You've done it. You did it with Sheikh Hasina.
Yes.
Correct. You changed around the whole relationship.
Changed the whole relationship.
Right.
You know, she shut down terror camps. She
she helped us. Yes.
Most wanted people. I think, you know, philosophically there are 2 or 3 things we can change. One is, and the External Affairs Minister himself has said this, we have to do away with the idea of reciprocity. I will only treat you as you treat me kind of thing. India is a much larger country than all its neighbors, and so many times larger that it can really be much more magnanimous. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, just in terms of being able to absorb.
We can offer much more than many other parts of the world.
Exactly, yes. And we're right here. The second, I think, we need to understand is that neighbors will often do as you do, not as you say. So there's no point being prescriptive. I mean, in Nepal, for example, we don't buy power from power plants that have been built by a Chinese company or has any. But there are Chinese companies that have invested in Indian projects. So you can't have a double standard, because people start to pick that out very quickly. And I think the third idea is that we need to philosophically embrace the idea of South Asia. I mean, I can't say this enough, because geographically, what choice do we have? We have the Himalayas to the north and the mountains to the north. We have the oceans to the south. We are bound together. There is no other place that has the monsoon in quite the same way. There's all the future challenges of climate change, of digital inequalities, of health issues, of food security, fuel security. These are all issues that are going to require a regional approach.
Absolutely.
So we need to reposition ourselves in a certain way in how we see these issues.
Well, I would agree that we need to embrace regionalism, and I think in doing that, we can learn very useful lessons from Indonesia. Indonesia is preponderant in Southeast Asia. It's had numerous conflicts. I mean, if you look at conflicts in Southeast Asia in the 70s, 60s, 50s, they make South Asia look like a kindergarten. But how did Indonesia deal with all that so much better? How did ASEAN, why was ASEAN such a success while SAARC was not? I think we have to centrally ask and try to answer that question.
So I think at the end we have to say that we have to be inclusive qua our neighbors, and we have to be inclusive qua our own population. And as long as we are inclusive, there is a road ahead that we can.
And don't stop talking.
Yes, don't stop talking.
There's no point in.
That's right. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's been a
Thank you
fascinating
very much.
discussion, and we'll come back again to see what's happening in the neighborhood as the years go by. Thanks.
Thank you.